Hello and welcome to a conversation on the Daily Burn. I'm your host, Eric Miller. Today I'm joined by an awesome progressive, one of the original class of Justice Democrats, Brent Welder. How you doing, Brent?
Hey, great, Eric. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for taking the time to chat with me. You have a long career. You worked as one of Bernie's advisors. You recently served on the DNC Platform Committee. You ran for a House seat, Kansas's 3rd. Which I'm going to just straight up say the establishment swooped in and bought a candidate and kind of displaced you, which was maddening. I don't know your take on that, but that's my take on that.
Yeah, well, I was up in the polls, and then in the last month there was $1 million of dark money, Wall Street money spent against me, and we ended up losing by that much. So that was pretty much how that ended up. I don't think they liked the fact that I was running on a platform that was going to squarely hold Wall Street and giant corporations and billionaires accountable.
Yeah, and it was a great race. Like you should have won that race. I'm going to just straight out say it. But I wanted to talk to you. Like I said, you recently served on the DNC Platform Committee. I don't have so much of an agenda here, but I wanted to kind of hit on a bit of the news of the day, right? So, that story is frustrating. Can you just give us the version of, what happened as you're serving on the DNC Platform Committee? You're trying to get Medicare for All into the language of the platform. What's the process? What were the obstacles? Can you share that story?
Well, so I was on the platform committee 4 years ago, actually, and this time I was on the rules committee. Okay. And yes, we did try to get Medicare for All in when I was on it, and they tried to get it on this time, and unfortunately, it did not succeed. What I was really focused on, kind of starting 4 years ago when I was on the platform committee, was I put forth an amendment that said that as a party, we should stand for getting the corrupting influence of big money out of politics, right? Seems like a pretty reasonable thing for the Democratic Party to at least aspire to, right, in their party platform. Right. Unfortunately, the establishment had a hand-picked literal corporate lobbyist that they had be the first person to speak against my amendment 4 years ago. And ultimately, the DNC instructed, their nominees to vote against it, and it ended up losing pretty significantly. I then 2 years.
Sorry to interrupt. If I ask questions, well, so what would their? I mean, it's just blatant, pay for play. But what's their angling? What's the reasoning that they offered for shooting that down in the Rules Committee?
I don't think that there was any good reason for it, frankly. They sometimes go back to the whole, we just need to study this issue, a lot more, which is just completely not even a good excuse, right? Yeah, a bunch of bullshit. Well, so then 2 years later, I ran for Congress, and I was actually the candidate that came up with the no corporate PAC money pledge that everybody is now well aware of. Thousands of candidates at all levels of government have taken that, presidential candidates, members of Congress, the whole 9 yards. And when Bernie Sanders nominated me to be on the DNC Rules Committee this time around in 2020, because this is an issue I'm passionate about, one of the amendments that I proposed did two things. One is it said that the DNC should not accept any corporate PAC money itself, right? And I wanted to put that into the DNC charter. The DNC committee had actually passed a similar rule or a resolution already a couple years before at the winter 2017 meeting, just saying basically like, oh yeah, we really aren't going to do that except for, we're not going to accept any corporate PAC money that contradicts our charter. Right. I thought it could be stronger, but I also thought, hey, if we have this rule, let's put it into the party charter so that we can make sure that it's permanent, right? So that was the first thing it did. The second thing it did is it said, let's have a ban saying that no corporate lobbyists can serve on the DNC, right? It didn't ban them from the building. It didn't, God forbid, ban them from the halls of Congress or from Democratic administrations. It literally just said, how about we don't have corporate lobbyists literally sitting on the DNC and, deciding our platform, our stances, our values, our rules. And not only did they not appreciate that very much. In fact, I was approached by an intermediary from the Biden campaign that told me that the Biden campaign was literally most upset about that particular amendment of all the amendments that were proposed at the meeting, and asking me to withdraw it.
Wow.
But not only that, they actually literally rigged the voting during the meeting, and use tactics to try to kill the amendment without even having an up or down vote, which they didn't do on any of the other proposals. And, you know, I can go into that in more detail as well if you'd like.
Wow, yeah, sure. I mean, that's like, there's no disguising that. That's like in plain sight. It's not even under cover of darkness. You know, how, you know, yeah, go into it more, you know, paint the picture.
Yeah, so it was, so it was live stream on YouTube by the DNC, the National Press Corps, and then a few nerds here and there like me around the country, people that are like me were logging in. Sorry, one moment. And so I turned off my ringer there.
No worries.
And what they did was so I presented my proposal, and then I had the opportunity to give a little speech and talk about why I thought they should vote for it, which I did. Immediately, maybe at this point, not surprisingly, they actually had a hand-picked corporate lobbyist on this committee be the first person to speak against my amendment. 4 years ago at the Platform Committee, I thought it was maybe just a funny mistake that they made, like literally having a corporate lobbyist be the first speaker against a clean government anti-corruption amendment. But now I'm realizing that it's actually literally by design, and that somebody at the DNC thinks it's a good idea. So while this corporate lobbyist is droning on about why the committee members should vote against my amendment, which actually later, due to some great reporting, I find out that this committee itself was stocked full of corporate lobbyists. The chairwoman of the committee, who herself is also a corporate lobbyist or works for a corporate lobbying firm, she said that the voting was opened up. And the way we were supposed to vote was we had this voting device on a separate window. This was a virtual meeting, so it was a separate window on our computer that we had been using the entire meeting, that had been working just fine. So I go over to the device, obviously, to vote yes on my own amendment. And what do you know? It's not working. There's the button to push yes, and it just doesn't work. And none of the buttons, they're all grayed out or they're not working. And so as this corporate lobbyist is going on and on, I keep checking back time and time again to try to vote yes on this amendment, and it's still not working. It's still not working. Then all of a sudden, in the middle of an actual vote, which I'm no Robert's Rules expert, but I am an attorney, and just doesn't really seem right. Literally in the middle of a vote, one of the DNC kind of establishment committee members does a motion to table my amendment, which while we were supposed to be in the process of voting on, doesn't explain at all what that actually means. Astonishingly, there's another committee member that's able to second that amendment. And the reason I say astonishingly is throughout the entire meeting, they actually had every committee member's microphones turned off, except for when the carefully crafted script that they had apparently made beforehand, said that somebody could talk, they would turn on the microphone. So how did they know to turn on the microphone of this member all of a sudden to second it? Wow. None of the protests from any of the other committee members were heard. And they immediately started voting to table it. And what do you know? All of a sudden the voting machine was working again. And they were able to vote on it. Now, luckily, they had accidentally left my microphone on because I had just been talking in support of my own amendment. And I was able to make a verbal protest of, well, first of all, I just said, what does this mean? Table until when? I honestly had no idea. Does it mean table like till 4 years, till the next convention? When are they tabling this? The meeting was only supposed to last another 15 minutes. And Barney Frank, who is actually on the corporate board of directors for a bank, who was also a co-chair, he explained that, well, what it means is that if there's not a vote to untable it that's successful by the end of this meeting, then this amendment dies without any vote, without any record of who voted for it and who voted against it. And I immediately verbally protested that. And then what do you know? They shut off my mic and put me back in a room where all the committee people were able to speak to each other behind the scenes. That wasn't seen publicly, wasn't seen on the the live stream. When I get back into that room, a lot of committee members, mostly the Bernie nominees, even some of the Biden nominees, were protesting that it really seemed extremely unfair, that there should be an up and down vote like every other amendment. This went on for about 15 minutes until the co-chairs announced that they were going to adjourn the meeting, which would have ultimately killed the amendment without a vote. And then literally after they already said they were going to adjourn, they said, oh, wait, there's been a change. They said, we're going to vote on whether to take the amendment off the table, which ultimately passed, I think, because so many of the committee members could just tell how much it stunk and how corrupt it seemed to table this one amendment. And then there was
and maybe partly because it was mid-vote. Like if to use your term, if they'd had their script a little more tight, it wouldn't even have come up for the vote, and it just would have been tabled and never re-raised, right?
Well, yeah, so the original vote to table was successful. So it was tabled, and then they went on to other business for 15 minutes, and then they came back and had a new vote to take it off the table, which I was shocked that they did. And ultimately, after the meeting, I was speaking with some higher ups in the Bernie Sanders campaign, or one in particular, and was told that actually the higher ups in the Bernie campaign had reached out directly to the Biden higher ups and said, hey, this looks really, really bad. You really should give this thing a vote, and was able to convince them to allow us to have a vote.
Wow. Yeah. So what's, I mean, as an attorney, you've worked in politics in various forms for, I'm assuming, most of your professional career. You said you're an attorney. What recourse would anybody possibly have in your situation? Is there anything you can do about any bit of that?
Well, frankly, no. Let's think back to the 2016 election, where it was essentially proven through records, through emails that were revealed, other statements, that the DNC was putting its thumb on the scale against Bernie Sanders in that primary. There was a lawsuit that took place, and ultimately, when the court ruled, they essentially said, even if there was wrongdoing, rigging of the process, putting their thumb on the scale, they literally are allowed to do it because they said the DNC is a private organization and the courts aren't going to tell them how to conduct their business. So let's think about that for a second. I mean, the winnowing of our field of presidential contenders, a vast majority of that process happens during the party primaries, right? I mean, I literally don't even know how many Democrats ran this time around. What was it, 27-ish, somewhere around there, right? About that many Republicans ran last time. So, the process where the American people believe personally that they are winnowing the field of who's going to lead our country down from a group of 60 people, let's say, or even more, down to 2, that entire process, there's a lot of evidence to say that it's rigged. Even the rules out in the open are rigged. I'm speaking of the superdelegates, which we can get into in a little bit if you'd like. And then after a lawsuit, the court says, and you know what? Even if that is proven, it literally doesn't matter. They're allowed to rig this extremely, enormously important part of the democratic process.
Yeah. Yeah, that's maddening. So, I watched you recently on Jimmy Dore's show, and Jimmy Dore's, he's an advocate for the People's Party and all that stuff, right? And, there's a case to be made, like, what you're talking about, what you're describing firsthand, and, there's no that's 100% accurate. How can you unrig that game? You know what I mean? Like, how can, let me put it, and let me frame it personally, right? You seem like an infinitely optimistic guy. How do you keep fighting that fight? How do you have faith that this battle can be won when you see that firsthand and it's so blatant?
Well, because it's happened before, right? And, I think everybody has their own style, their own tone. My optimism is what keeps me alive, energetic, keeps me going. Because if you don't have that and you see despair and injustice all around you, then what else do you have, right? I know that other people, do things, I guess, in their own ways. But when I say it's been done before is, I truly do believe that we live in a more just society than we did 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. And that it's enormously difficult to achieve change and to move justice in the right direction. But that ultimately, because I believe that when ideas are put out there, when they're debated, when they're discussed, when truth is revealed, which was really my hope by putting forward these amendments during these committees. Obviously, the first hope was that they actually would vote for it and actually make change that way. But I always felt like, if they did not vote for it, then at least the public would be able to see exactly what was going on.
Right.
So that's what I think. I think, and I do feel like the public is becoming more and more aware of what's going on. I mean, look at some of our amazing electoral gains recently. Cori Bush, she ran for actually U.S. Senator many years ago. I don't know, what was it, 6 years ago, something like that. Can't remember exactly how many years ago. And she was up against a Democratic primary opponent who was extremely well funded, had the party backing. Her campaign was, running on a wing and a prayer. I actually was a volunteer organizer on that campaign. She ended up losing, I don't know what it was. I wouldn't be surprised if it was 90-10, maybe 80-20, I'm not sure. But she kept speaking truth. She kept getting out there. She kept giving it a try. She ran for Congress 2 more times. And now she's in the United States Congress. Jamal Bowman upset an incumbent. AOC, of course, upset a very powerful incumbent. We have Alex Morse now taking on Richie Neal in Massachusetts, and I'm following that case extremely closely. We have Ed Markey, who has been in for a long time, but he's taking on a Kennedy. I just feel like even the political landscape now, when you even compare it to 4 years ago, and certainly if you compare it to 6 years ago, which is before Bernie really put himself out there and started, leading this movement, I think there's been an enormous sea change, and I'm optimistic that we can keep that going.
Yeah, right on. Just think of the Postmaster General hearings that are happening. I guess there's one tomorrow, and then there's one on Monday. The Monday one is the House Oversight, which has AOC, Ayanna Pressley, Rashida Tlaib, Ro Khanna, right? Even Katie Porter, right? So, think of, like you said, that's a sea change. We wouldn't have had those voices, on those committees confronting corruption, and like you said, you've got Cori Bush, we got Jamal Bowman, hopefully Alex Morse, Marie Newman, there's a couple great ones in Texas, Julie Oliver, Mike Siegel, right? Yes, that's a great point. It just takes a bit of time, and the fact that, kudos to you for sharing this story and getting it out there, right? So, that historically that has happened, right? But it's probably happened more behind closed doors. There wasn't sort of, independent media to share the story, to go viral. I'm assuming the way people get their news now, they sort of triangulate it among sources, right? So they're not just spoon-fed, the corrupt narrative or whatever, the corporate narrative. So, great answer. I share that optimism, but it's effing hard some days.
It's really hard. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me ask you, just kind of, Obama ran on hope and change, and I believe he worked on his campaign at that time. And we can get into a million ways that he didn't deliver as a progressive or whatever. But just your thoughts on his speech last night, if you watched it. Did you have any thoughts on his speech last night?
I watched. I was doing a live stream on a podcast that was like kind of live commentary during the convention, and honestly, there was kind of a decent amount of discussion going on during it. So, and I haven't had a chance to go back and watch it closely. I will say this, and I was one of the first staffers on Obama's campaign. I was very hopeful for his candidacy at the time, and and I'm not someone who thinks that every single thing he did was terrible. I think that he did have some positive things that he did, but I also think that, President Obama ultimately was a lot different than candidate Obama, which is, extremely unfortunate. I will say, one of the things that my very first thought that went through my mind when I saw him come up there and he had the Constitution behind him on the wall, and was how much hope I had during his candidacy that, okay, here's literally a constitutional law professor. Maybe this is somebody that will really understand our fundamental rights and liberties as Americans and do things to make for a much more just and fair society. Everything from, of course, racial justice, how immigrants are treated, how, Black people are treated in this country, one thing after another, as well as how are journalists treated, right? How are whistleblowers treated? And Edward Snowden is a hero of mine. I think he's an absolute amazing, courageous, intelligent, terrific human being. He literally risked his life, and he still to this day has his life hanging by a thread because, Donald Trump has said before that he wants to put Snowden to death. Now, of course, he's saying he might pardon him. How do you ever know what Donald Trump is going to do, or he's thinking from one day to the next? But we do know one thing, which is that Barack Obama chose not to pardon Snowden. In fact, his administration chose to, from what we can tell, bring, I believe they're sealed, charges against Snowden, and also treated treated members of the press who were trying to keep sources secret differently and more harshly, and prosecuted them more often than we had, I believe, ever seen before in American history, right? So, right from the very moment, I thought it was certainly a bold choice for him to talk with the Constitution behind him, because I really feel like, President Obama didn't really live up to the promise that candidate Obama did on some of those issues.
Yeah, right on. Let me ask you, so that drop off of hope and change into, real governance, right? And I was talking to Carrie Evelyn Harris about this yesterday, about keeping progressive Democrats or people-centered Democrats that are fighting for policy, keeping constituents, not you and I, not the political junkies, but keeping, the average person that sort of half pays attention. They voted for Obama and then change didn't come, right? They vote for a progressive in a primary, and then, some corporate Democrat comes in and steals the seat, and the change never gets delivered, right? Like the way I phrased it to her, I'll sort of restate it, is, Democrats, this is in broad brush terms, right? Republicans run on a platform of fear, Democrats run on a platform of love, and they never fully deliver on that platform of love. Like the Bernies get screwed, the Brent Welders get screwed, and we get sort of corporate Democrats, right? And then we ask the Democrats to come out and vote again and again, and we never deliver on that platform of love, right? Universal health care, all that stuff, right? So how do you keep, it's a tricky question, and God, I hope you have the answer for it. How do you keep voters inspired to come out and vote for Democrats when, that change never arrives?
Well, and it's not just voters, right? It's the 100 million plus people, voting age, otherwise qualified adults, that choose not to vote time and time again in these elections nationwide. And so it's both, both those people and people that are on the verge of wanting to stop voting, right? And I think that, I've been a grassroots organizer for probably the better part of 20 years. Okay, that's what I did on Obama's campaign. I was the national field director for the Teamsters Union and all the other things. I helped Bernie's campaign with organizing. And I've had numerous discussions throughout my life with people. My entire job was to try to get people to vote for Democratic candidates, right? And to get people to vote. And when I would meet people who weren't voting, literally not once that I can remember in my entire life did somebody say, honestly, the reason I don't vote is because I think both parties are doing such a good job that, no matter which one gets in, I literally think I'm taken care of. Out of thousands and thousands of people that I've spoken with, I've literally never once had that conversation, right?
They're both so good. I can't decide.
Right. But I mean, that's not even like, you know,
Right.
you could imagine a world where we actually do have two great options, right? I mean, I could imagine one at least, and maybe someday we'll get there. But I've never even heard one person say that, right? But what do they always say when you can actually get down to it is that they don't trust either party and that they literally don't feel like their vote is going to make any difference whatsoever. And, you know, I've been around politics at least long enough, you know, like I said, going on 20 years now, that I've been able to see how campaign strategy and voting patterns have changed. And this is one thing that I've noticed is that the old school way of doing campaigns and trying to win these elections was really, it was even more important than ever back then to raise as much money as possible because it was almost literally the only way that you could communicate to the electorate, right? There was really no internet, or the internet was very new. A lot of people weren't on there. Maybe they didn't trust what they were finding on the internet. There certainly was no such thing as social media. All of that stuff, you know, the lack of computers or good computer technology made it much more difficult to even organize from a grassroots level. So it was, you know, less efficient to do even everything down to the phone calls and the door knocking and all that kind of stuff. And so just like creating this enormous war chest of money was a virtual guarantee that you would win because you were literally the only candidate that was able to communicate to the electorate, or at least best able to communicate to the electorate. What I have seen over time and time again, getting better and better with every election cycle, is two things, frankly. One is that the grassroots now with online fundraising is able to actually, in a lot of cases, raise money at least to keep the races a little bit closer. But also that, you know, the candidate that is winning, it's not just entirely who raises the most money anymore. I mean, look at AOC. What was she outraised 6-1 by Crowley, something like that? I don't remember the exact, but it was an enormous difference. You know, some of these Justice Democrats that are winning certainly went. You know, Cori Bush. Now I don't know ultimately if she ended up raising more or less, but certainly, you know, she was struggling as she went along election cycle after election cycle as an underfunded candidate.
That Marquita Bradshaw race in Tennessee, she was outspent like 10-1.
Yeah,
you know, incredible, right?
Perfect example. And so, you know, we have ways to get our message out there, but what I think it proves is that the message actually is important, right? So why are all these 100 million people not voting? Well, they don't trust the parties. What's one really great way to start trusting the Democratic Party? How about passing some basic amendments saying that at least the party itself isn't going to take corporate PAC money? You're not going to have the decisions literally made by corporate lobbyists sitting on the committee. But when they fail to do stuff like that, then it doesn't surprise me at all that, you know, people aren't all excited to go to the polls for them.
Right on. Yeah. So how do you square that when you're sitting face to face with that rules committee and they're doing the shenanigans right in front of you, and then you have to sort of get in the field and inspire? Come on, man! I know Joe Biden's not your first choice, but we should vote, you know, against Trump or whatever. Like, how do you square that? Like, how can you, you know?
Well, I'm a big believer that basically the only, essentially the only effective thing we have is our vote. Okay. You know, believe me, I've organized and I've attended countless rallies, sign waving sessions, participated in phone banks to congressional offices. And yes, do those like on rare occasions. Does that actually work? I'm sure it does on rare occasions. But at the end of the day, people need to vote for a candidate who's not corrupt. They need to vote for somebody that you know, they believe would be the right leader for our country. And I'm not a big believer that there is a lot of hope to move any politician once they're in office on things without them fearing for the safety of their own, you know, seat, essentially.
Right on. Yeah. Yeah, that was one thing about Bernie Sanders that I think is incredible, and I'm going to assume you share this opinion. You know, no matter how much they screwed him, no matter how many times face to face they insulted him, right, in the debates and whatever, he would always stick to, our job now is to, like, he would never let his ego get in the way of what our job now is to do whatever. And that's always his phrase. Our job now is to defeat the most dangerous president. Like he never skips a beat, right? He might backstage, he might, in the quiet rooms or whatever, but, publicly he has a true north, and he always just manages to address the cards that he's dealt with at that point in time, right? He never gets salty or whatever. Do you share that view, or did you ever see anything backstage that affirms that? Like, what was your experience with him in terms of that?
My thought of Bernie Sanders is that he is an absolutely incredible leader, unlike any that I've seen in my lifetime. And and his strategy, I think, is pretty clear, which is the inside-outside strategy, right? And there can absolutely be, really great, interesting intellectual debate as to whether, the inside-outside strategy is more effective, or just a purely outside strategy, or I suppose a purely inside strategy is most effective to moving the party and creating more justice. He clearly has chosen the inside-outside strategy, and I think he has done it brilliantly. I think he's an absolute genius, but more so than that, yes, that's great that he's like super brilliant and a genius and everything, but even more so, and the reason that that he has been so effective and such an amazing leader is because of his courage, the willingness to say what he believes and what is right over and over and over and over again. And, almost every time I agree with him, I have a feeling that almost every time most people agree with him. I don't think anybody's ever going to agree with someone else 100% of the time. I'm really distressed somewhat about the fact that recently, over the last month or so, in the progressive community, I've been seeing more and more criticism of Bernie Sanders. I assume that it's directly tied to, the presidential election that's going on right now, and Bernie, trying to defeat Donald Trump, and progressives, not wanting him to embrace Biden as much as he is. But I don't think the progressive movement or even the country would be anywhere close to where it is now. I don't think the progressive movement would be as strong. I don't think the country would be as progressive on the issues. I mean, I saw a recent poll that 68% of Americans agree with Medicare for all. And if it weren't for him, if he hadn't boldly, even just decided to stand up to the Clinton machine and put himself out there, I don't think that there's any chance that Medicare for all would even be a majority, or even honestly maybe be on people's radar.
Yeah. And then, imagine, the wave of people running, based on his influence or his inspiration, right? I had a candidate on in New York, let's say Bernie inspired AOC, AOC inspired, her name's Marcella from New York, right? There's these other waves that are coming up behind, and, Bernie's the, in my lifetime, the legend that started that, right? So yeah, I hear on everything you said there. I'd love to have you back on to talk just about sing Bernie's praises, right? I think you're right. I think there's a little bit of backlash right now because of the presidential campaign, but we're in the heat of a battle right now. Bernie's legacy is going to be untouchable going forward, right? That's my perspective on that. So, we mentioned Alex Morse and a few other races. Just kind of closing up here. I'd love to have you back on anytime. I think you're an absolute superstar, Brent.
Thank you.
I've admired your work, and I love having progressives like you in the fight, and what you do I think is awesome. Are there any races that you want to highlight? I like in Kansas or in the state. Like I know there are some. I have a Kansas House candidate on Monday, Christina Haswood. She's in a Kansas House race. Is there any in Kansas or in the country that you want to highlight? Any races you want to put a focus on?
I'm still kind of focused on the primaries right now because they haven't ended. I think we've talked about a couple of them here: Alex Morse versus Richie Neal. We have Markey versus Kennedy. Unfortunately, in my neck of the woods, I'm in Kansas, and finding a progressive to get extremely excited about. Unfortunately, this year is a little bit few and far between. But I think so much of our work as progressives needs to be done in these primaries to make sure that we get progressives into the general, because the establishment loves to perpetuate a myth that progressives can't win. However, they do every single thing they possibly can to make sure that a progressive never is the nominee, especially in swing districts like mine, right?
Yeah,
My
yeah.
district, when I ran, I was actually beating the Republican incumbent in general election polls by the largest margin of any Democratic challenger in the country. In a district that, you know, has been Republican, has been Democrat, is one of the, you know, eminent swing districts in the country. And so, you know, I was leading in the general election polls by more than any other challenger in the country. I was leading in the primary, and still the establishment put in $1 million of dark money in the last few weeks to defeat my candidacy. And frankly, I think the reason they did that, and even, you know, believe it or not, even in a Democratic primary, the ads they were running said, Brent Welder, too liberal for Kansas, right? Over and over and over and over again, to scare people into, and to perpetuate this myth that progressives can't win. But I think the reason they're so afraid of a progressive to win is because it will be proven that being a progressive is a great way to win in the general. I mean, my district, for instance, I mean, if you consider, you know, that we were going to try to win back the voters that had voted for Obama and then Trump, try to win them back to the Democratic side. They'd already voted for Obama. You know, who are those voters? Well, it's populist, economically populist voters who are really struggling, poor people, middle-class people. And, you know, I just don't think that corporate Democratic candidates speak to those people at all. And, you know, if we're going to do that, I think we need to keep those people in mind. And it's also a great way to add to the voting rolls all of those, you know, over 100 million people that haven't been voting at all.
Here, here. Awesome. Well, thanks for taking some time to chat with me, Brent. Like I said, I appreciate all your work. BrentWelder.com. You know, I don't know how active that still is. That's your.
Yeah, I don't think. Maybe just go to @BrentWelder on Twitter, and but I did put the list also on there of the actual DNC Rules Committee members that voted against the anti-corruption measures that I put forward. And then Sludge, a media outlet, did some tremendous reporting and found that 25% of those people that voted against it actually are either corporate lobbyists or work or get paid by advocating for giant corporations. And the list is on Twitter there. Brent with an N, Welder like the job.
Right on. I'm actually, did you say 25%? I'm surprised that's a low.
Yeah.
I would think it would be, you know, 75% or something. Wow.
Well, we could get into more detail of how they do it. This was just the convention rules committee. When you get to the actual DNC rules committee, everything's changed. And I could go into detail for anybody that's nerdy enough to want to hear about it, of exactly how they rig those, so that even though a somewhat small, like let's say 10% of the committee is actual lobbyists, on the subcommittees, the chairman essentially gets to decide who's on there. So they have a large percentage, if not oftentimes a majority of those subcommittees being corporate lobbyists and kind of corporate deal makers. And then, you know, those subcommittee reports just get automatically, you know, put into place by a voice vote. So.
Yeah, so how do you, sorry, I know we were wrapping up, but maybe I have you back and we talk about that. Like, how do we change that in advance of 2024, right? Like, that's not something you can change overnight. That's something you have to chip away at over years, right? So, you know, this is a front line we can be fighting in 2021, right?
Well, you know, I've had this amazing opportunity the last two conventions to serve on DNC committees, literally only because Bernie Sanders was the one that nominated me to it. I don't think, you know, the establishment folks were wanting me anywhere near the room. But, you know, and so I've tried to utilize that platform as much as possible to try to expose the truth and fight for justice. But you know, let's be honest here. Like, yes, would it be amazing to root corruption out of the DNC? Yes, it would. But where do we really need to root the corruption out of? And that's Congress itself, right? And administrations of both parties. And, you know, I just think that the corruption that the DNC itself is allowing to occur within its very walls is merely, you know, is mostly symbolic of what you can only imagine is the corporate corruption that's happening in the halls of Congress, where our laws are being literally written by corporate lobbyists, and then the corporate lobbyists are buying the votes of Congress people in both parties to make sure that those laws that were written by them pass. It's completely terrible. The plus side is I hope a lot more people will get out there and run for office on an anti-corruption platform. You know, if there's the more and more people running on the same platform that I ran on, maybe the establishment will have to like spread the attack money wealth around a little bit more, and
right.
maybe some of us will find our ways through. And what I have found is that by running on a strong anti-corruption platform, almost everybody, no matter what party there are, if they're no party, if they're not even a voter, almost everybody thinks that that's a really good thing to do, and thinks that that's the type of person that we want in leadership. Ironically, literally the only people that I ever get resistance from are the top party insiders from both political parties. Right. So you have a situation where, this room in Washington or wherever it may be at the moment, of DNC or RNC committee people voting on whether to allow the corporate influence within the party is literally like the only room of Democrats or Republicans in the entire country that actually feel that way. And 99.9% of the rank and file folks want corruption out of the process.
Yeah. How about again? I'm trying to let you go, but Nancy Pelosi endorsing Joe Kennedy. Like, how maddening is that, right? Whatever it was 2 years ago or a year ago, they put out that that rule that if you're an outsider challenging an incumbent, you can't. You'll be blacklisted from, whatever, as a consultant, all that stuff. And here she is, endorsing, a corporate Democrat versus, one of the most progressive guys in the Senate, right? That's maddening. And
and you had Ilhan Omar's race. The amount of fundraising that her, challenger had against her was mind-blowing, and it's inconceivable that he would have had anywhere near that amount if the establishment wasn't rallying around him.
Right. Yeah, and it's, tying that back to that point of how people are seeing that, like that's in broad daylight right now, right? If you're a person that pays any bit of attention and you're aware of that incumbency rule, that challenge rule that Nancy Pelosi put in effect or whatever, and then you see this endorsement and you like, well, that's a direct, that's a two-dot connection of hypocrisy right there. Like, it's not that complicated to see what's going on there.
And the fact that it's a Kennedy just makes it even more obvious, right? I mean, the Democrat who, is a former corporate attorney who ultimately was the beneficiary of all the corporate money in the race that I ran, Sharice Davids, who's now in Congress, she endorsed Kennedy the other day as well, right? So you have her endorsing, you have Nancy Pelosi. It is hypocritical, but you know what it comes down to, and I think we all ultimately knew it at heart, and this is just exposing it now, is they never meant it from the get-go. It was an excuse to hold back progressives. It was an excuse to hold back progressives and to hold down progressives. And at the time they kind of thought, well, the only progressives that are running would have to be challengers, because of course progressives are never going to actually find their way into our sacred halls. But, now we have, and and now the hypocrisy, the lies, the corruption is being exposed. But thank you, Eric, for all of your hard work that you do constantly to keep this dialogue going, to expose the truth, to fight for justice, because as terrible and frustrating and exhausting and every other word I can think of as this process is, I do think that we're making a difference. And we live in a time now where, I think that our achievements are even tangible, and we can even see just over a relatively short amount of time, the last 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, how much of a difference we're able to make.
Right on. Here. Yeah, wait till Monday when we see the questioning from our Justice Democrats friends to this corrupt postmaster. There's a real world example.
Oh, right? Yes.
Can't wait for that. Yeah. Can't wait for that. All right, Brent, I appreciate you saying that, and I appreciate you taking some time to chat with me. I'd love to have you back on anytime you want. So stay well, my friend.
Thank you, Eric. Talk to you later.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye.